It was Jasmine Crockett versus Kellyanne Conway, truth against deception, facts against spin. As evidence piled up, Conway's cool smile cracked. Hatch Act breaches hidden payments and lies unraveling on live TV. 5 times she slipped, 10 times she broke the law. Is this the moment when power finally pays the price? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. Rain slammed against the Rayburn building windows like warning shots. Each drop against the glass felt like a countdown to something explosive. The city outside was soaked and tense, as if Washington itself was holding its breath. Inside, the fluorescent lights burned cold and merciless, cutting through the air like a blade. Every blink, every breath echoed through the wooden chamber. Reporters hunched over laptops, keys clacking like gunfire. The sound of a single cough seemed to shake the room. Then the doors swung open. Kellyanne Conway entered, first Navy suit, sharp as steel, her smirk daring anyone to look away. 3 lawyers followed like silent shadows. Across the table sat Jasmine Crockett, steady, fierce, wrapped in deep violet, her folders marked with flashes of red. The cameras zoomed in. 2 women, 1 truth, and only one would walk out unshaken. The air inside the Rayburn hearing room vibrated with tension as Jasmine Crockett leaned slightly toward the microphone, her tone calm but sharpened like a scalpel. Mrs. Conway, she began, her voice steady enough to slice through the hum of cameras. You do know what perjury means, don't you? The words were deliberate, surgical, the kind of question that didn't just seek an answer, it built a trap. Every reporter in the room knew it. Every lawyer on Conway's side straightened in their seat. It was the opening shot fired with a whisper. Kellyanne Conway tilted her head, a smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. Congresswoman, she replied, her tone dripping with practiced condescension. I've faced opponents far sharper than you long before you even graduated law school. The jab landed like a slap, meant not just to insult but to remind everyone who had been in power longer. A few Republican lawmakers chuckled quietly, a sound that spread like a cold draft. Conway leaned back in her chair, confident, crossing her legs, as if the hearing were just another talk show. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't blink. Her expression stayed calm, her hand already reaching for the iPad beside her. With one swipe, the screen came alive, and the large monitors behind her lit up with a frozen image of the White House lawn. The date appeared in white text at the corner, March 6, 2020. A low murmur rippled through the room. Jasmine tapped again, and suddenly Conway's own voice filled the chamber. We need to stand behind Coach Tuberville, Alabama. Show up for him. The clip was unmistakable. The White House seal gleaming behind her, the podium bearing her title, Counselor to the President. A wave of movement spread across the room. Reporters leaned forward. Cameras clicked furiously. A few Republican members tried to hide their smiles, exchanging glances that said this could get messy. The Democrats on the panel sat still, eyes locked on Conway. The camera operators zoomed in close, catching the subtle change in her face, a twitch in the jaw, the faint tightening around her eyes. Conway's smile returned, but now it was tighter, almost forced. That was a personal comment, she said evenly, brushing a strand of hair back. I was expressing my opinion as a private citizen. I wasn't campaigning, I was speaking freely. Her voice softened at the end, as if the calmness could smooth over the cracks forming beneath her. Jasmine's reply came swift and cold. A personal opinion, she repeated, leaning forward slightly, delivered from the White House lawn, while holding the title Counselor to the President. Her tone never rose, but each word struck like a hammer. The Office of Special Counsel already recommended your removal for repeated violations of the Hatch Act. That's not an opinion, Mrs. Conway, that's documented evidence of misconduct. The Hatch Act is a federal law that prohibits government employees from using their official positions to influence elections. It exists to keep politics separate from public service, a firewall between duty and partisanship. The words hung in the air. Even the sound text stopped moving. The tension was so thick it felt visible, a shimmer between 2 women who both knew exactly what was happening. Jasmine had drawn first blood, and everyone in the room could feel it. For a moment, Conway didn't speak. She tilted her head again, as if weighing her next move. Then the smirk faded, not all at once, but like a mask slipping an inch too far. The cameras caught it, the smallest shift from defiance to calculation. She forced a faint smile, but the gleam in her eyes was gone. The room stayed silent, breaths held. It was clear to everyone watching Jasmine Crockett's first strike had landed right on the heart, and this was only the beginning. The echo of Jasmine's last words was still hanging in the air when the chairman slammed the gavel down. The sound cracked like thunder, sharp commanding final. Order, he barked the wood striking metal again a second time until the murmurs died. The chaos melted into silence, the kind that made every heartbeat in the room sound too loud. The cameras refocused, whirring softly, catching every twitch, every breath. Kellyanne Conway used the pause to fix her hair fingers, brushing her temple in a motion that was more nerves than vanity. She exhaled, glanced to her right, and met the eyes of her Republican allies. A few nods came back, small rehearsed gestures of reassurance. She straightened in her chair, forcing the smirk to return, pretending control she no longer had. Across the table, Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She didn't even glance up. Her hand turned a page with a slow, deliberate motion, the sound of the paper crisp in the silence. Every movement said power, calm, restrained, dangerous. The thick folder before her looked less like paperwork and more like a loaded weapon. The camera zoomed in again. Beads of sweat gathered on Conway's forehead, glinting under the harsh fluorescent light. Meanwhile, Jasmine lifted her water bottle, took a sip, and set it down gently. She looked like a soldier waiting for the next command, composed, unshaken, and ready to strike again. The tension was thick enough to taste. Then out of nowhere, Kellyanne Conway leaned forward, voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Congresswoman Crockett," she said, her tone sharp and venom-laced, "you took $50,000 from a PAC that's under investigation, and you're lecturing me about ethics." The words hit like gunfire. The chamber gasped, the energy shifting in an instant. For the first time that morning, the Republicans straightened, whispering to one another, the sound growing like a rising wave. A few even smiled. It looked like Conway had found her opening her chance to claw back control. Jasmine didn't move. She let the noise swell and let Conway bask in her brief illusion of victory. Then slowly she smiled, not wide, not theatrical, but calm, knowing. "You're right," she said, voice steady as glass. "I took that donation. And when questions were raised, I returned every dollar. The investigation cleared the passé completely. I faced it head on. I took responsibility." Her tone was simple, confident, unshaken. The calmness itself was unnerving. The Republican side began to quiet down, sensing that something was coming. Without another word, Jasmine reached into her folder and pulled out a thick stack of papers marked with bright red tabs. The movement was sudden, deliberate. She slammed the file onto the table, the sound cracked like thunder. Pages flew into the air, scattering across the polished wood. "But you," she said, her voice rising, for the first time controlled fire in every syllable, $500,000 from the Trump campaign funneled through CAC Consulting. "All while you were still serving as counselor to the president." She paused, eyes locked on Conway. "Would you like me to read your transaction records out loud for the committee, Mrs. Conway?" The words detonated in the room. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. The camera swung hard to Conway's face, zooming close enough to catch every flicker of panic. Her skin drained of color. The smirk was gone. One of her lawyers leaned in fast, whispering something urgently, but she shoved his hand away, jaw clenched tight. Her eyes darted toward Jasmine, toward the chairman, toward the press, but there was nowhere left to look. The chamber erupted. Reporters pounded their keyboards like machine guns trying to keep up. "500,000 through CAC Consulting," one shouted. "Violation of the Hatch Act again," murmured another. Flash bulbs exploded across the room, white light bouncing off the mahogany panels. The chairman pounded his gavel for order, but the chaos only grew. Every eye was now on Conway, not the prosecutor anymore, but the accused. Across the table, Jasmine didn't move amid the storm. She sat with her elbows on the desk, hands folded, eyes fixed on Conway with quiet precision. Her calm was almost cinematic, a soldier who had just landed a perfect strike. The noise, the flashes, the whispers, none of it touched her. Because at that moment, everyone in the room knew it, the power had flipped. Conway had come to accuse, to dominate. Now she was the one cornered. The hunter had become the hunted, and Jasmine Crockett had just turned the entire hearing into a battlefield she controlled completely. The room had flipped. The next beat was inevitable. The chairman slammed the gavel hard. 5-minute recess to restore order. Wood hit metal again, the echo running the walls. Staffers repeated the call mics, clicked off, and the buzz fell flat. Chairs scraped, but the cameras kept rolling like they smelled blood. Conway shot to her feet, her chair skidding back. She was already in the hallway phone to her ear voice, low and urgent. "Get me now." Her hand trembled as she pressed the phone tighter, trying to calm her breath. A lawyer reached for her elbow. She brushed him off and kept moving. The camera caught her smoothing her hair, eyes sharp and searching. She paced under the brass seal, scanning faces, counting options. Inside, Jasmine Crockett didn't budge. She leaned toward her aide, exchanged a few quiet words, and accepted a small note. The lens found the stack still on her desk, thick files, bristling with red tabs, so many untouched, it looked like a row of charges with the pin still in. She turned one page with slow care, then took a measured sip of water. Calm, centered, unhurried, she sat like the board was already solved. In the corridor, reporters jammed shoulder to shoulder, aides and lawmakers, collided, questions flew, and Jasmine waited like a chess player who could see the final move. The chamber door creaked open. Jasmine Crockett walked back in calm as ever, the sound of her heels echoing off the marble floor. The reporters hushed instantly. She took her seat, straightened her notes, and raised a single document for the cameras to see. "Exhibit 47, she said, voice crisp. An email sent by Kellyanne Conway to the Trump campaign on June 15, 2020. She read aloud, "I'll go live from the White House to add weight." Gasps rippled through the room like a breaking wave. Conway's face stiffened. "I need to see the context," she snapped, trying to sound composed. Jasmine didn't blink. "The context," she said coldly, "is a federal crime." Her tone sliced through the silence, final and merciless. The audience shifted. The energy in the room tilted again. Even the chairman leaned forward. The cameras zoomed tight on Jasmine's hand as she lifted another sheet, this one trembling slightly under the lights. "Let's talk about handwriting," Jasmine said. She raised a note written in blue ink, a memo in Mrs. Conway's handwriting. The screen behind her filled with the image, bold, cursive, unmistakable. "Remember to call Tucker tonight to hit Alabama. Sign it, counselor, to the president to make it stick." The signature gleamed under the camera light. The chamber exploded, gasps, shouting, the thunder of reporters hammering their keyboards. The proof was visual, irrefutable, lethal. Conway's expression cracked for the first time. The mask of confidence slipped. But Jasmine wasn't finished. She turned to the clerk. "Call in Mr. Daniel Reeves," she said. A man in a gray suit stepped forward, placing his right hand on the Bible. His voice shook, but his words were clear. "I once received direct orders from Mrs. Conway to delete emails related to the Hatch Act." The room froze. The sentence echoed like a verdict. The witnesses, the staffers, even the opposing side sat still, the gravity of it all settling like a storm cloud. The next second, chaos erupted. Conway stood frozen, lips parted, but no sound came out. Reporters rushed forward, cameras flashing in a frenzy. She ordered deletions, someone shouted. Security moved fast, blocking the aisles, holding back the crowd as the chairman shouted for order. Conway's lawyers whispered furiously, but she waved them off, eyes locked on Jasmine. Jasmine sat perfectly still, the faintest smile touching her lips. The hearing room was now a battlefield in flames, and every explosion, every camera flash was proof of victory. The red-marked folders still sat beside her, untouched, waiting. And everyone watching knew one thing: if Exhibit 47 was this devastating, whatever came next could finish Kellyanne Conway for good. The room hadn't even cooled from the last explosion when Jasmine Crockett stood again, a single sheet of paper in her hand, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Chairman," she said, voice firm but measured, "I'm submitting Exhibit 52A into the record." Cameras zoomed in instantly. "This is a formal immunity agreement signed by Mrs. Kellyanne Conway with the Southern District of New York after President Trump left the White House." The murmurs began even before she turned the document around. According to this agreement, Mrs. Conway admitted to participating in unauthorized political activity while serving in the federal government. In exchange for her full cooperation and testimony, she was granted conditional immunity, conditional upon providing truthful statements in any future proceedings. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Jasmine continued, her voice cold, deliberate, unstoppable. "But today," she said, tapping the document hard with one manicured finger, Mrs. Conway has perjured herself before Congress. That means her immunity is void. The protection she bargained for no longer exists. She now stands exposed to full prosecution. She looked directly at Conway, not blinking once. You admitted guilt once to save yourself, and then you lied again to the American people. This is not a misunderstanding, Mrs. Conway. It's the end of the deal you made. Conway's face turned pale. Her jaw flexed, trying to find words. Finally, she slammed a hand on the table. You just declared war on half the country. The sentence burst out like a scream echoing off the chamber walls. The Republican side stirred, murmuring in defense, trying to catch the crumbling ground. But Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She leaned in, her tone like ice under pressure. No, she said, each word landing like a blow. I just ended a lie that lasted an entire generation. The silence afterward felt deafening, a silence that wasn't calm, but the kind before a storm rips through. Every camera stayed locked on the two women, one standing defiant, the other unraveling by the second. Then the room erupted. Reporters jumped to their feet, typing furiously, flashes exploding in bursts of white. Aides shouted for space security, rushed to the dais. The chairman's gavel pounded for order in vain. Exhibit 52A confirms she signed immunity, someone yelled. Southern District of New York post-Trump, another shouted back. Conway didn't move. She sat there, shoulders stiff, eyes wet and unfocused, staring at the document that had just turned her shield into a weapon against her. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. One of her lawyers reached over, whispering something frantic, but she brushed him away. Across the table, Jasmine Crockett sat tall and unshaken, hands folded over the remaining unopened folders. Her eyes cold and focused, fixed on Conway, not with cruelty, but with finality. The light caught the edge of her binder, still gleaming with untouched evidence tabs. Everyone in the room knew Exhibit 52A wasn't just a document. It was a detonation, and Jasmine Crockett had just pressed the button. The echoes of that gavel didn't stop in the hearing room. They shook the entire nation. Within hours, every major network turned its spotlight toward Capitol Hill. CNN called it the most historic congressional hearing since Watergate. The red banners stayed on screen for hours, replaying the moment Jasmine Crockett unveiled Exhibit 52A. MSNBC cleared its entire primetime lineup, broadcasting the full hearing 3 times in one day. Even Fox News, usually loyal to Conway, struggled to defend her. Their anchors hesitated, faces tight, before admitting on air, the damage is simply too great. For the first time in years, every major channel was united in one message: America had just witnessed accountability in real time. On social media, the explosion came instantly. Clips of Conway's shaky voice as she invoked the Fifth Amendment flooded every platform. The video of her handwritten note, "Call Tucker, tonight sign as counselor," became the image of the week. Millions watched in disbelief as the signature zoomed into focus, as if the truth itself had been caught under a microscope. The moment Daniel Reeves, the former White House staffer, stood and swore under oath that Conway had ordered him to delete evidence, spread across the internet like wildfire. The internet turned into a digital courtroom. Lawyers, professors, and citizens all joined in, breaking down the hearing frame by frame. One user summed it up perfectly: for once, truth didn't whisper, it roared. The Justice Department could no longer ignore what had been uncovered. Within 48 hours, DOJ officials announced they were reopening the Hatch Act investigations that had been shelved years ago. Files once labeled administrative were now under potential criminal review. The Department of Justice quietly sent out subpoenas to several former senior aides. Inside Washington, the ripple was immediate. Phones buzzed, lawyers were called, and old alliances started to fracture. The Hatch Act, long dismissed as a forgotten formality, suddenly mattered again. News anchors began referring to it as the law with teeth. For the first time in decades, people understood it clearly. The Hatch Act forbids federal officials from using their public office for political campaigning, and this time there would be consequences. Out in the streets, the reaction was electric. People gathered in diners, bars, and campuses to rewatch the clips. In Chicago, an older man told a reporter, "For the first time, I saw someone powerful get stripped bare in front of us. No excuses, no spin." A group of college students in Atlanta cheered as they watched Crockett's calm face fill the screen again. In Los Angeles, a retired veteran wiped his eyes and said quietly, "I fought for that, for someone brave enough to speak truth," with cameras rolling. The nation, long cynical about politics, felt something unusual belief. Inside the federal workforce, the hearing became a turning point. Employees who once treated ethics briefings as paperwork suddenly listened with new attention. A young staffer at the Department of Education sent a memo to her team that read, "From now on, the Hatch Act is not a suggestion." At agencies across D.C., compliance officers reported a surge in requests for clarification. Government lawyers reviewed their public statements twice before speaking. The phrase Hatch Act no longer drew smirks, it drew caution. And across the bureaucracy, whispers spread that Crockett changed everything. Meanwhile, Kellyanne Conway's world collapsed overnight. Once one of Washington's most feared strategists, she became a symbol of arrogance brought to ruin. Late-night shows ran split-screen footage on one side, Conway's confident smirk from years earlier. On the other, her trembling face as the evidence surfaced. Editorials called her the architect of her own downfall. Headlines read from counselor to cautionary tale. Even conservative publications wrote that her downfall was a tragedy of ego and denial. The photos of her leaving the Rayburn building, pale eyes red, clutching her phone, circulated worldwide. One newspaper described it perfectly. "She entered that room untouchable. She left as proof that no one is." And while one legacy collapsed, another began. Jasmine Crockett became a national name. The same commentators who once dismissed her as inexperienced now called her the conscience of Congress. CNN anchors said she had restored the moral temperature of the House. Columnists wrote that she had done what few dared. She forced power to answer to truth. Even those who disagreed with her politics couldn't deny her composure, her precision, and her fearlessness. She wasn't shouting for attention. She was steady, surgical, relentless. Every move, every question, every document she produced became part of a new standard: accountability with evidence. In classrooms, the impact was immediate. Law professors used the hearing as a modern case study in ethics and evidence. Students stayed late after class to rewatch her exchanges, studying how she dismantled falsehoods with calm precision. A young woman at Howard University wrote in her notebook, "I want to be that unshakable." Professors quoted her line, "Context is not an excuse for crime," during lectures about constitutional law. And law school applications across the country began citing her as inspiration. Public servants also felt the tremor. A young analyst at the Environmental Protection Agency told a colleague, "If she can stand up to that machine, I can refuse an order that breaks the rules." Whistleblower offices reported an uptick in anonymous tips, small acts of courage sparked by one televised moment. Even senior officials began signing off memos with a single line borrowed from her testimony. "No one stands above the law." Families at home watched together. Parents pointed to the screen and said to their children, "That's what courage looks like." In small towns and big cities alike, Americans argued and reflected, but most agreed on one thing: something real had happened. Not a scandal, not a sideshow, but a moment when truth had finally outshone power. When the frenzy began to fade, the long-term impact came into focus. The Hatch Act, once dusty and forgotten, now stood at the center of political conversation. Agencies began updating training programs. Internal compliance divisions added Crockett's hearing clips as official teaching materials. Some even renamed the segment the Crockett Precedent. The message was simple: integrity isn't optional, and silence is no longer safe. Kellyanne Conway became the cautionary tale, not just for breaking the law, but for believing she could outtalk the truth. Jasmine Crockett became something larger, the face of what accountability looks like when power is forced to face itself. And the moral lesson, simple but searing, echoed far beyond politics. No one stands above the law. Truth can be buried under noise, lies, and privilege, but it always finds a way back. One person standing firm in the light can shake an entire system awake. A law student deciding to stay in school, a civil servant choosing to follow the rules even when no one's watching, a father telling his children that justice still matters. These small acts became the quiet aftershock of that day. The hearing was over, but the story, the belief that courage and truth could still rewrite the course of history, had just begun. The political aftershocks came fast and hard. In the Republican Party, the ground split open. What had once been a fortress of unity around the Trump legacy now looked like a battlefield. One faction, led by a handful of veteran senators, called for a clean break from what they described as a culture of corruption. They went on camera, faces drawn, insisting, We cannot defend the indefensible anymore. The other faction, louder and angrier, doubled down, declaring Conway a victim of a political witch hunt. The clash played out across every network, a civil war inside the GOP, waged through sound bites and headlines. Committee rooms turned into strategy bunkers. Every statement, every silence carried weight. Allies who once dined together now avoided eye contact in the Capitol halls. The party wasn't just divided, it was bleeding from within. Meanwhile, the Democrats moved like a tide in the opposite direction. For years, they had struggled to find a symbol that could embody accountability without arrogance. Jasmine Crockett gave them exactly that. Her calm precision, her composure under pressure, and her relentless pursuit of truth became the new image of courage in government. The Democratic leadership seized the moment. They praised her not as a partisan warrior, but as proof that integrity still had a place in politics. Fundraising surged overnight. Volunteers who had drifted away from politics came back saying, "She reminded me why I believed in this." Strategists began whispering about her as a future national figure, while talk shows described her as the conscience of the modern Congress. In schools and universities, the hearing transformed from political theater into a teaching moment. Law professors rewrote their syllabi to include it as a case study. This one professor told her students is how the rule of law survives when someone dares to enforce it. High school teachers played the clips in civics classes, showing Jasmine's calm face and Conway's unraveling as examples of how power and accountability collide. College debate teams dissected her cross-examinations. Ethics seminars quoted her statement to Conway. The context is a federal crime. Students who once saw politics as distant suddenly saw it as alive and dangerous. They learned that the law isn't abstract. It breathes through the people who uphold it. Beyond classrooms, the educational message sank deep into everyday life. Law isn't a game, one mother told her teenage son as they watched the replay on their living room TV. This is what happens when people treat it like one. In workplaces, government employees revisited training manuals, reading every rule with new seriousness. Judges and lawyers cited the hearing in op-eds, calling it a restoration of civic spine. People began to talk again about the weight of truth, about why silence is never neutral. Crockett's words, delivered with the calm of conviction, became the moral through line of the nation's conversation. Justice exists because some people still have the courage to speak. In coffee shops, on podcasts, in late-night debates, the same question kept surfacing: when did silence become complicity? Citizens began examining their own spheres, offices, classrooms, families, asking what wrongs they had ignored out of convenience. Journalists noted a cultural shift, describing it as the return of moral clarity. Even those who once called themselves apolitical found themselves moved. It made me think, one factory worker in Michigan said, "If she can face that kind of power and not flinch, what excuse do I have?" Inside the corridors of power, Jasmine's name became shorthand for reform. Younger lawmakers from both parties began adopting her tone: direct, evidence-based, unflinching. For the first time in years, hearings were held where documents, not slogans, drove the discussion. The culture of denial that had plagued Washington seemed for a moment to crack. She changed the temperature in the room, one senator admitted off record. "It's harder to lie now." The Hatch Act, once mocked as ceremonial, now stood as a living line in the sand. Officials treated it like sacred text, a rule finally reclaimed from irrelevance. Kellyanne Conway's downfall continued to echo as both a warning and a lesson. Her name, once synonymous with political mastery, became shorthand for the dangers of unchecked arrogance. Conservative commentators who had once defended her began using her as a cautionary tale in ethics speeches. "This is what happens when loyalty to power replaces loyalty to truth," one writer said on live TV. On live. The public watched as her allies distanced themselves, her appearances vanished, and her influence evaporated. In the span of weeks, she transformed from strategist to symbol, the face of a generation that thought it could outtalk justice. Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, became something else entirely. She didn't chase celebrity. She avoided talk shows, declined photo spreads, and returned quietly to her committee work. But her presence carried new gravity. When she entered a room, cameras straightened. When she spoke, the noise faded. She wasn't just a congresswoman anymore. She was a living reminder that courage doesn't shout, it stands firm. For many Americans, she became proof that integrity could still win in a cynical world. As the political dust settled, a broader reflection began. Editorials called the hearing a national reckoning. Commentators compared it to the days of the Church Committee and Watergate, when democracy had nearly torn itself apart to rebuild. Across campuses and living rooms, the same lesson repeated: the law is not a game, and truth is not a luxury. Justice survives only because there are people willing to defend it, not with slogans, but with facts and bravery. Silence, everyone now understood, isn't peace, it's permission. In the final analysis, what lingered was not the spectacle, but the message. Democracy isn't defended in silence. It's defended by those who dare to speak. Jasmine Crockett had done just that. Her questions had cut through years of noise. Her calm had exposed what fear had hidden. And her courage, the kind that stands still while the world shakes, had reminded a weary country that justice is never automatic. It must be demanded, spoken, and lived. And somewhere far from the Capitol's cameras, ordinary Americans carried that message forward in classrooms, in offices, in quiet moments when truth demanded a voice. The storm had passed, but its echo remained. Courage had spoken, and democracy had heard. Thank you for watching until this moment, and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.